So we will record this conversation and post it to our website after. So if people aren't able to stay for the whole time or want to go back and review something, that will be available on our Delta Drought Response pilot page. Um, just some quick housekeeping rules. So we're going to be talking about what's new for the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program for water year 2023. Everyone should be muted, and presenters will be able to unmute themselves as we go through the agenda, which my colleague Martha is going to talk about in a minute here. We will have a question and answer period in which interested applicants will be able to ask questions. So you'll be able to raise your hand and we'll unmute you during the question and answer period. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Martha.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and bring up the agenda for the day. And we can walk through it quickly. My name is Martha Ozenoff, and I'm with the Delta Conservancy. And we have folks on several folks are going to be presenting. We have the Delta Watermaster, Office of the Delta Watermaster, and the Nature Conservancy are also going to be giving presentations today. So as you can see, just a quick agenda. We're welcoming and introductions. Thank you to Hope for doing that part. Then the meeting objectives today are to go through the new water year 2023 Delta Drought Response Pilot Program. It's been changed, updated from last year, so we wanted to bring those changes to your attention. We also wanted to walk through the bid form and answer any questions. So we're going to hopefully have quite a bit of time at the end for questions, and we're going to all moderate that. We will also have an opportunity. I've got a contact page with an email address. If you don't get to your question, you can email it to me as well. So just a quick walkthrough. Those are the meeting objectives. We're going to talk about the 2023 water year, or the new program for 2023. Go into a deeper dive on the reverse auction process, since that's maybe new to folks. We'll preview the online bid form and walk through one that I mocked up, and we'll discuss some of the issues and different practices there. Then the Nature Conservancy will talk about bird benefit practices. We will have a quick presentation on having research monitoring equipment on your site and the benefits of doing that. And then hopefully we'll have a robust period of time for questions and discussion. So I believe that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Michael.
Thank you, Martha. And I'm going to quickly hand it to my colleague. I'm Michael George. I'm the Delta Watermaster, and I'm going to hand it to Lindsay Kamar, who's a water resource control engineer and the brains of the outfit. I'll be back later.
Thanks, Michael. As Michael mentioned, my name is Lindsay Kammeyer. I was involved in the selection and analysis for the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program this previous water year, which just ended last week. And I will be helping to facilitate the selection as well as the analysis for this coming year. But first, I wanted to provide a recap of last year's pilot program. Last year, we had over 85 applicants, and from that pool, we selected 35 grantees from across the legal delta. State staff learned a lot about farming practices and economic considerations from farmers selected as grantees, and they were all fantastic to work with, provided us so much information. Key lessons learned from last year include opening the application process earlier in the year, as well as selecting bids after all the bids were submitted rather than a rolling acceptance. Preliminary results from this previous year show, and again, these are just preliminary results subject to change. Not surprisingly, we found some actions saved more water than others, but in general, savings were less than expected. I have additional data if folks are interested and would like to discuss later on in this meeting. We will be publishing all the data and our analysis later this year. While we are interested in saving water for this program, we are very eager to gather more data about different actions that folks are able to take. We're still in a data gathering mode and hope to get a better understanding of consumptive use in the Delta rather than just focusing on saving water. We're really trying to get a more holistic understanding of how changing practices can change consumptive use. For what's going to be the same for the Water Year 2023 program, we're unfortunately still in similar drought conditions. Our reservoirs are low. Weather forecasts for October through December of 2022 expect dry weather. It's likely that we're going to remain in drought and our water management system will continue to be stressed this water year. The Delta faces continued risk of salinity intrusion, and we hope this program can keep water in the channels to prevent that salinity intrusion and limit negative environmental impacts. Water saved in the 2022 program and in the future, 2023 program, do not increase allowed exports from the Delta. The 2023 pilot program will have $10.5 million available for grantees, which is slightly more than the $8 million available last year. The Delta Conservancy will administer the grants again this year. Grantees will be chosen by a selection committee that includes staff from the Delta Conservancy, Department of Water Resources, Delta Watermaster's Office, California Department of Food and Ag, UC Merced, and the UC Extension System. Submitting a bid application and accepting a grant is entirely voluntary. No one is going to be forced into this program. It is just if you would like to participate, we are happy to accept your bid and happy to walk through the process with you. Delta water users can submit bids for practices they believe will conserve water. These practices will be compared to the business as usual ag practices that they would have done if they were not accepted and enrolled in the pilot program. We will use nearby fields operating at business as usual to compare the selected practices, the selected grantees' practices to. This will assist us in estimating consumptive use savings. And as far as how we would estimate consumptive use savings, the water conservation is going to be measured entirely by and at the expense of the state, nothing on the grantees. The state will estimate the consumptive use of every grantee using OpenET, which is a scientifically rigorous, cost-effective, non-invasive satellite-based ET calculation. Up to 6 grantees can have UC Davis installed and monitored eddy covariance stations in their field, which will provide additional high-quality data. This is a pilot program focused on gathering data and understanding how changing farming practices does or doesn't impact consumptive use. And we really appreciate all your interest in this program and are eager to work with everyone this coming year. With that, I will pass it back to Michael to explain the differences and the changes for this coming Delta Drought Response Pilot Program 2023 program. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Lindsay. And so Lindsay, who is the chair, pardon me, chair of the committee that is charged with doing the data analysis. And so she is someone who's got her fingers on the data from the 2022 program. But obviously we were developing and making changes for 2023 without the benefit of all that information. Indeed, even though the water year ended last Friday, there's about a month-long latency period, a delay before we get the OpenET data. So as she said, we're talking about preliminary data, and what in 2023 is going to be the same as it was for 2022. My role is to describe here what's changing, what's new, what's different for this year, and a little bit of why we've made some of these tweaks and changes. First, and perhaps most importantly, we're getting out earlier. One of the consistent issues that we recognized last year was that it was hard for farmers when we didn't get the grant program announced until January and really off the ground until February. We needed to be in the field earlier, which is why this program went live on the Delta Conservancy's website on Monday of this week, and why we're having these series of conferences or workshops to acquaint bidders with the program. Secondly, we're looking for a wider array of program objectives. Probably most importantly, to try and recognize that some of these actions could have benefits to birds and terrestrial species, whereas last year we were really focused much more on, in terms of the environmental impact, we were much more focused on out-migrating salmonids. So we're looking more broadly this year to include those avian and terrestrial species benefits in addition to the aquatic species. We are significantly increasing the ground truthing process this year, particularly so that we can better calibrate OpenET, the satellite evapotranspiration measurement system, and identify any discrepancies between different ways of measuring evapotranspiration. And again, that'll be primarily in the background as far as applicants and grantees are concerned, because that will be the state's responsibility, and specifically UC Davis has a pretty extensive ground truthing plan ready to roll out to support the program this year. We identified on a preliminary basis that there were several practices, general practices, that seemed to be the most effective in 2022. The migration to non-irrigated or modestly irrigated small grains, the use of deficit irrigation, for instance, instead of irrigating alfalfa 4 times during the summer, reducing it to only 1 application, foregoing a crop, as Lindsay mentioned, foregoing corn, leaving stubble in the field to protect the soil, foregoing tomatoes and doing the same. All of this with a background of the Healthy Soils program, so as to avoid bare ground and the ET of bare ground in lots of places in the Delta. But importantly, we are retaining the quote unquote other category, because we really do understand how much we learned from applicants and participants last year. And you know your fields best. We wanted to keep that in addition to the 3 categories that seem to, with certain variations, have the most benefit throughout the Delta last year. We really wanted to keep that other category so that if you have ideas, suggestions, things that you think will make sense in terms of the overall program objectives, we wanted to leave space in the application process for you to propose that. Next thing that is different this year from last year, particularly because we were late in getting into the field, the response we got from everybody is keep it simple, give us 1 price per acre, let us figure out the best way to allocate those funds if we're awarded a grant. So that's how we ended up kind of throwing a dart at the board and ended up with $900 per acre of actions for enrolled acres, $900 an acre, fixed price. One of the things that we heard back and saw in the review and inspection process that we went through was that, as we knew, that was a crude way of figuring out how to maximize the benefits within the limited budget. And so this year we're going to an auction process where for a given action that you would apply for, you can state the price at which you'd be willing to do that. In order to induce people to bid aggressively, we've agreed that for each of the actions, we'll select, with all the applications in hand, the maximum number of acres that we can afford under the budget of the program, and we'll set that as what we call the market clearing price. It's the highest price necessary to hit the number of acres that we need for that action within our budget. And everybody who bids below that will be considered for a grant at that market clearing price. So let's just use an example. Let's say for a specific action, you bid $100 an acre as sufficient to provide an incentive for you to carry out the action that you're proposing. And for similar actions, once all the bids are in, we determine that in order to get the number of acres in that category that we want, we have to pay a higher bid price. And let's just use a number, $500 per acre. Then everybody who bid at or below $500 an acre will be considered for a grant at the market clearing price at $500 per acre. So it's a way of differentiating among the practices, increasing the overall program efficiency in terms of dollars per estimated acre foot of water savings, and be fair to everybody so that for similar actions, everybody gets paid the same, even though we recognize from experience in 2022 that there will be potentially significantly different water savings at different places within the Delta. It's important, though, that everybody understand that we won't just do this mechanically to achieve the lowest cost for the acre feet saved. This goes back to what Lindsay was saying. There are a lot of objectives to this program, and what we'll be doing is categorizing similar practices to establish that market clearing price and determine the price to be paid for similar actions. But we'll be selecting grants or offering grants based on overall program best fit. And what we mean by that is it appears that we might maximize water savings by clustering similar practices in one area where that's been particularly effective, either because of soil type or elevation or depth to groundwater, those different things. And we don't want to cluster everything in one area. So to achieve best fit for program objectives, which include getting data about what works where and to be able to compare that, in order to find that best fit, we may be making decisions that are not financially optimal, but achieve overall best fit. So there'll be a selection committee that's responsible for doing that and being transparent about it, explaining why this is how we achieved best overall fit. So the applications are all going to be due on October 18th instead of the rolling application process and rolling approval process that we had last year. We're going to try and use the insight that we developed last year, take all the applications at the same time, evaluate them at the same time, and put them in rank order at the same time, so that when we announce application selection and offer grants, we'll be able to explain how the selections achieve best fit to maximize the overall benefits for the limited budget that we've got. We expect to announce the applications quickly after the application process closes on Monday the 18th. The selection committee we'll be doing some numerical analysis and then getting together on Friday of that week to begin the discussion of the selection process. And we hope to announce the selections in November, and the grant period would begin January 1st and run through the end of the 2023 water year on September 30th, 2023. So that's what's different. I think, Martha, the next thing on the agenda is to take a little bit deeper dive into the reverse auction process, which is also my responsibility. We came up with this process to try and make the selection process more transparent, fair, and as objective as possible, given the subjective elements of figuring out best fit. For instance, the example I gave, most water savings would be clustering, but best data selection would tend to spread it out more. We've created an electronic bid form, which Martha will go through in a couple of minutes. So it's an online form. You'll go on the website, you can fill out the form and submit it electronically. That's important because we've designed that form so that certain information will get dumped into our analytical spreadsheet analysis, so that it should shorten the time. One of the things we learned last year is that we had to do a lot of one-on-one going back to bidders, which was fine as we were learning all this and as we were doing rolling approvals. But of course, because we did that, applicants that came in later that we wish we had budget left for, we weren't able to give the same consideration to, because we'd already expended the budget. This year, with everything coming in at the same time, and even though some of you have already bid, for which we're grateful, no decisions will be made until all the applications are in after October 18th. So you're not disadvantaged to take more time, think it through, refine your bid, etc. In terms of strategy, the way a reverse auction works is that applicants should bid the lowest incentive program or the lowest incentive payment that they would need to carry out their proposed practice on their project site. You know more about it than we do. Bid as aggressively as you can, because by bidding the lowest incentive payment that you would feel was adequate compensation for what you're going to do, you'll get to have the market clearing price. So there's a benefit to bidding low because you're going to get the market clearing price, and there's a risk to bidding too high because if you bid over the market clearing price, you won't be considered. So just keep that kind of strategy in mind as you're preparing your bids. Each bid, each application on the form that Martha will go through in a little bit relates to one specific project site on which you'll do one specific proposed action. And it'll need to be a minimum of 100 contiguous acres. We found last year where we had some acreage less than 100 that it was really difficult in those smaller fields to distinguish the signal from the noise, so to speak, to understand enough of what was going on, because the field was too small. And even though we built buffers around each of the fields, around 30 meters all around, this year we've decided to make the minimum contiguous acreage 100 acres. So you can bid as many different applications as you want, but each one you can only bid the same acreage and the same action one time. So if you want to bid 2 different actions, it's 2 different applications with 2 different footprints for a project site. In addition we learned from last year that it was best to ask the applicant to help us or to tell us what would be the best comparable field, comparison field, to help us identify the impact of the actions. So this year, unlike last year, we're saying, give us your Google Earth map of the project site where you propose to carry out the action. But let's say what your action is, that you're going to forego a furrow irrigated tomato crop that you would otherwise grow. So we're asking you to give us a comparison site that is as nearly comparable to your project site that's growing that furrow irrigated tomato crop, so that we will have your best guess as to how we can compare apples to apples. One field where you're carrying out your proposed action under the grant for an incentive payment versus the best comparable field, in your opinion, that you can also create a Google Earth map and say, I think that my project site is best compared to that project site. And then we'll have the ability after the fact through OpenET to compare and hopefully get a better numerical representation of the impact of the action on that field. Again, there's no limit on the number of bids that any applicant puts in, but to be fair, we're agreeing that no single applicant will be approved for grants in excess of 1,000 acres. So putting that limitation of 1,000 acres, but you can bid 2,000 acres in as many specifics as you want, and just recognize that when we go through the process, we'll have a stop lock on any individual applicant at the 1,000 acres. Once we get the applications in, we'll group them together to do this comparative analysis. You'll be bidding on an incentive payment dollars per acre. Then we will take your application, and the state, at the state's expense, will use the experience from 2022 and our access to OpenET. We'll make an estimate of the potential savings. You won't be responsible for making that estimate. You won't be responsible for hitting that target, but it's how we will take your bid at dollars per acre and turn it into a dollars per projected acre foot of savings. That'll help us decide what the market clearing price is, how much we can afford to do in each of the categories. So that's how we'll equalize things across the Delta and then be able to set the market clearing price and move forward. So again, we urge you to bid aggressively, because the low bid will be raised to the market clearing price, while high bids will be eliminated at that stage. And to recognize that overall, this reverse auction process should help us, all of us, optimize the value or the budget that we've got to expend here to get the maximum benefit for all of us, to understand what water saving actions work best, how to track water. All of this water will be assigned to increase the buffer, the safety buffer against salinity intrusion. We'll consider, for those of you who are water rights law nerds like me, we're going to consider all the savings as dedication to in-stream beneficial use. That means it won't be available to increase exports. It won't be available. So if you save water, your neighbor can take more. This will be, all the savings will be dedicated, just like under Section 1707 of the Water Code, to in-stream beneficial use. So it'll create an incremental buffer against the risk of water quality in a dry year. So Martha, I think that's probably where I stop and you take over with the online bid form.
Great, thanks so much. I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm going to walk through the bid form. And with the caveat that Lindsay might chime in if I'm not mentioning something. So hopefully I'll get it, but let's go ahead and do that. So first step here is to go to our website, and it's the deltaconservancy.ca.gov. Then you will do a drop down at the grant program, select the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program, and then click here for application form. This has been sent out through our automated email service is not quite the right word, but the automated email. So probably everybody on this call already has access to this this website, but I just wanted to highlight one more time where it is. You would click here. This is not live. I filled out a mock form. So I'm going to go ahead. So I will not click here, but this is where you would click to start your process. I have gone through this form. It doesn't a couple of things to note. You cannot save your process, your progress. So don't sit down to work on this until you have dedicated time to finish the process. I will say it doesn't take probably more than maybe a thoughtful half an hour or more, and maybe obviously think through your practice or practices before you start the process. But it's not an onerous form. Let's just put it that way. So we start with some easy things. What's the name of your enterprise? So in this case, I made up, it's called SSJDC, which is Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy Farms. My name, so you would put, whoever the lead contact person would be there. And then you'd put your email. I have our contact email, Delta Conservancy, my phone number. I'll provide these contact information at the end of this presentation, but I put that down here. The contact mailing address, this is our office. And then I'm making up that we also have a farm at this site, but chances are, that's not, you're probably going to have your farm headquarters here, and then the proposed physical site is going to be where you're actually out in the field. I selected YOLO, but we have the 5 counties, Delta counties that you could select from the drop-down menu. And you know what county you're in. I will note that when you select your county, it then branches forward to other questions. So at this point, it looks like you can submit your application, but once you select your county, more questions come forward. And the reason for that is, interestingly enough, the APNs are different per county. So Yolo County has a 12-digit APN. Other counties have different APNs. I'm sure everybody's familiar with their site APNs, so it's probably not going to be something that will trip you up. But if so, we do have some information right here on your county. So I think I moved myself forward by mistake. There we go. We're back on the right one. So the next question,
I think this
19.
is actually further on the form.
Is it
Because there's 2
oh, I
places.
must have, thank
Yeah,
you. I don't
no
know how
worries.
I move forward without clicking an arrow. Thank you for saying that, Lindsay. I was like, wow, we're already on question 18. We're not on question 18, we're on question 9. So after you fill in your APN, there's the proposed project site is located in, and the drop-down menu, the choices are the North Delta Water Agency, which is where YOLO is in, but there's also the Central Delta Water Agency, the South Delta Water Agency, and then the Contra Costa Water Agency. So you can reach out to probably Michael if you don't know which water agency you're in, but I'm guessing everybody knows that. So then this is sort of where we get to the meat of the proposal. Question number 10, your proposed action at the project site. And this is a drop-down menu, which I probably should have screenshotted the drop-down menu, but the options that we have listed here, I selected for Go a cash crop, but we have 4 options total. which is deficit irrigation. So that would be, you usually irrigate your field 10 times, you're going to irrigate it 5 times over the season. And so you're saving by cutting your irrigation in half. Shift crop type from, a more thirsty crop type to a less water intensive crop type. Forgo a cash crop. So maybe you have, 3 plantings of corn, you're going to do 2 plantings of corn. And then there's the other, and that would be something that you're thinking of that you think might be novel and water. Let's start out that it needs to, I think this would really save water, and it's a novel approach. You could type in and say, I've got a suggestion for doing this. So, and then under number 11, this is where you would explain in a little bit more detail what you're going to do. And I purposely kept mine short because I didn't want people copying what I wrote. But as an example, I will forego planting 500 acres of corn. So I'm saying I'm foregoing a cash crop. And so, what you would maybe say more is, ordinarily I have 1,000 acres of corn. I'm only going to plant 500 or something along those lines. So the selection committee will ask questions if they have questions, but I would encourage people to, write more than I wrote. And then I specifically for number 12, I left the bid price as XXX because I don't want anybody, I didn't want to air grab a number and I didn't want anybody to copy my number. So as Michael was saying, we want you to, look at what your costs are and bid aggressively and sort of understanding that clearing price. You might want to, you'll be strategic in how you bid. You don't want to undersell yourself, but you don't want to bid too high. So that's price per acre. And then the next one that we have, let me go back really quickly, is where we're talking about proposed actions right here. You're going to have only one proposed action per bid. However, you can put in more than one bid, and your bids can only total up to 1,000 acres. So, but you could say, I'm going to forego 500 acres of corn. So I'm going to forego cash crop. I'm only going to do 500 acres of corn. You could do a second bid that says, I'm going to do deficit irrigation on a different field. So different acres, different field for, and instead of irrigating 10 times, I'm going to irrigate 5 times throughout the season. And so that's for 250 acres. And then you could put in a further bid. I'm not encouraging people to do this, but I'm just giving like an example, spinning it out as far as I can to get to 1,000. You could do 250 acres to shift crop type. So you're going to shift from, something that takes a lot of water to something that takes less water. So I wanted to highlight that you can only select one thing under 10, but you cannot describe more than one action here. So which could happen because this forces you to do one thing. This is sort of free flow. So you would have more than one bid going forward if you wanted to do more than one practice. And like I said, the bid form isn't too hard to fill out. It's pretty quick to fill out. So if you're like, oh, I want to do 2 separate things, it's 2 separate bids. And the bid price per acre will probably be different per action that you're taking. So that brings me back to number 13, the bid acreage and the number of acres. So in this case, they were saying that they were going to forego 500 acres of corn. The answer here is 500. So and separate bid could be 250, like in what I just said as an example. The next one you would do a separate bid and it would be 250 in here. So and then number 14 is, what will your farming practice be at the proposed project site if you're not selected for this program? So we're kind of trying to get at, okay, if we don't give this this enterprise a grant, what type of water savings are we at risk of losing? So you would say, oh, I would plant all acres in corn. You maybe could say something else, like instead of doing corn, I'm going to do something, all in tomatoes, just whatever you would do if you were not participating in this program. And then we shift to talking about the proposed comparison fields address. And I know folks who have existing grants are familiar with this, but what the comparison field is one that's not enrolled in the program that is reflecting a business as usual practice. So in other words, not what you were doing like in number 14, this is the business as usual. I would be, you know, on the project field, I'm irrigating less, or I have, you know, different a more amount of corn. Business as usual, or less amount of corn. Business as usual will be the more amount of corn, so that we can compare it. So now I'm not sure I'm doing a good job of describing that. So I don't know, Lindsay, do you feel like you want to chime in on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, go
For
for it.
for the comparison field, again, yeah, we're just trying to find a similar field nearby that would be your business as usual practice. So ideally, it would be the same farmer operations there, similar irrigation methods, similar soil type, um, trying to get it as similar as possible. We realize not all those conditions can be met. So sometimes you say, oh, I know my nearby farmer, she does it. Her farming practice is very similar to what I do. This field would be a good comparison. So just giving us an idea of what that comparison field is to help us with our analysis later on would be extremely helpful for making the analysis process easier, because we had to go back and forth a lot with the grantees this year to determine it. So just determining this upfront will be very beneficial.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Continuing along those lines, we'll figure out what finish out this question about the comparison field. So we've got the proposed comparison field physical address. I made this, I'm just making this up. I made it, down the street of where our office is. So instead of it being 1450 Halyard Drive, it's 1500 Halyard Drive. And then it's a mile away from where my proposed action acres are. It's still in Yolo County. And then here's the parcel number. It's slightly different than the one that I had before, so it can't be the same parcel number. And then if you have additional information to provide about the comparison irrigation action, please describe it below. So again, sample text, but I said, field is adjacent, same soil type and irrigation needs. So that's sort of what we're, how is it similar? Why did you select this site for comparison? And then the next items here I'm going to talk about, but I'm also going to hand it over to my colleague Greg from the Nature Conservancy to flesh out questions on these following questions. So I'm just going to go over them quickly. Michael highlighted that we have a bird benefit practice that's new this year, and we're talking about applying water at the correct time of year to benefit birds, because they're also suffering in this drought. And so we wanted to provide some type of benefit or extra compensation for those who are interested in enrolling in this program. So the next question is, are you interested in being compensated for bird benefit practices? $75 an acre for shallow flooding, 40 acres for nest cover, and then as it says here, see solicitation summary for details, which is on our webpage. And also Greg's going to go over this. So of course I want to do this. I love birds. So I said, yes, I want to do it. And then I know that this will be a good practice for me in the spring, maintain shallow flooding. So I selected spring. You select whatever works for your operation in your fields. And then I said that I was going to do it on 250 acres because I have a site that I can use for this, ideally suited. Again, I'm just mocking this up. So Greg will go into some of the specifics on that. Because it's spring flooding, it's going to be during the spring, so March 15th to May 15th. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about specific dates as we go forward. And then this is sort of, if you had anything more that you wanted to talk about, maybe that shorebirds visit your fields, at a certain, during the spring or the summer. Maybe that waterfowl visit your fields during the fall. So maybe you put something in there. I put something very generic because I wanted Greg to speak to this. But so please have TNC, the Nature Conservancy, contact me with more information. So we'll talk again, we'll shift to this in just a second. The last two questions are you willing to host research monitoring equipment? As we highlighted earlier, we only need 6 farmers who are willing to do this. So, depending on who says yes, we'll look at, we're going to want it in different parts of the Delta, different areas, different practices. So, we'll take a look at that. It is also described in the solicitation summary, and we do have somebody who's going to talk about it a little bit later on in the presentation. And then finally, so you're at number 26. It doesn't take too long to get here. By checking yes here, I acknowledge that providing maps of the proposed project site and comparison field is an application requirement. Unfortunately, we cannot upload files and documents using the form that we're using, so it has to be a separate process. And what will happen is after you click submit, you'll get some information about where to send that Google Earth Pro or Google Earth map. And so that's that. So you click yes, you have to click the yes. If you click no, you're not participating. So you click yes, you hit submit, and you're done. And then Michael went through the solicitation practices. So that's that. I am going to stop sharing. I know there's going to be questions about it. I will say I'm delighted to see that we're running ahead of schedule so that we will have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Greg with the Nature Conservancy to talk about the bird benefit program.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to present mode here. Great. So thank you, Martha and others, for the introduction thus far. And as Martha mentioned, I'm going to speak about the optional practices for bird benefits. I don't have my camera on, but I guess I can proceed without that. So within the solicitation, there are several practices listed that pertain to providing habitat benefits for birds. And this is a figure that came directly from the solicitation. And these include shallow flooding, which can take place both in spring and fall, and also nesting cover. Oh, here I can click this icon. Great. So I guess you've got me on screen now, for better or worse. And so why are we including waterbird habitat within this program? Well, certainly waterbirds are suffering as a consequence of the drought. They're suffering at the loss of natural habitats, natural wetlands, but they're also suffering because a lot of agricultural lands that is taken out of production. And when we look at waterfowl declines over the past 50 years, they're really pronounced, especially for shorebirds. So across North America, there's been a decline of approximately 40% in abundance of shorebirds, with 68% of the species declining. And in waterfowl, we've also seen declines. Although overall, there's been an increase in abundance, there are a lot of species, including mallards and pintail, which are in a state of decline. And we're fortunate in that we're on the Pacific Flyway, and this is just an amazing superhighway of migration of birds that goes all the way from the Arctic down to the tip of South America. And migratory species are particularly challenged by changes in habitat and also climate change, which is leading to the increased droughts that we're seeing. And for example, there's the dunlin, which is a shorebird species. They breed up on the north slope of Alaska, and they have these particular stopover sites that they utilize, including the Copper River Delta areas in Canada, and then down in California, where a large proportion of the population actually overwinters. So when we look at the habitats in the Central Valley, what we see is not how they used to be, which this is an example of, but instead a transformed landscape where there's a lot of agriculture, of course. And in terms of the numbers, there's been dramatic loss of wetlands only about 250,000 acres compared to the 4 million that were there previously. And we've seen declines in the waterfowl population numbers and also in shorebirds. But fortunately, a lot of the agricultural habitats that have replaced the wetlands that used to be here have great resources for these birds, and they can work really well for meeting their habitat needs. And as many folks know, and as has been shown in the literature through lots of research, rice is a model habitat type for water birds, particularly post-harvest when many of the fields are traditionally flooded. And we've seen really high numbers of birds using these fields, including a lot of special status species. In the rice landscape, though, what we find is that the flooded habitats perform a lot better at meeting the needs of the birds than the unflooded ones. And we see that both in terms of the species diversity, which is in the top figure there, and also in terms of the density, so the number of birds per acre out in these fields. But there's a problem for water birds, and in particular for shorebirds, in that the timing of the flooded habitat availability isn't perfectly suited to their migration phenology. So when they're coming through, doesn't perfectly align with the amount of habitat that needs to be there. And you can see that in these two figures, where on the left side, we see the flooded habitat that's available to the birds and how it varies over the course of the non-breeding season. And then on the right, we see a figure that shows how the population fluctuates over time, with lower numbers coming in, but starting as soon as July, when really there's hardly any habitat at all, and then peaking around April. And when we look at this in terms of the bioenergetics, so the food energy needs of the birds, what we find is that there are these persistent times when habitat is in short supply for the birds. And these take place in the late summer and early fall. So the red on that top figure shows times when pretty much every year there is not enough habitat available to meet the needs of the migrating water birds. And in orange, we see the time when in some years there's enough habitat, in other years there isn't. And basically the gradation to green there is when there's always enough habitat. So in the middle of the winter, there's plenty of habitat for shorebirds because all the fields are flooded. But on the shoulder seasons, as we call them, there's a limited amount of habitat, and there are these shortfalls that the birds experience. And on that bottom left figure, what you see there is just a calculation of the amount of additional habitat that is required to meet the needs of the birds. So we have a practice here in the program, which is to establish and maintain shallow flooding. And the specifics are to have an average depth of 4 inches in fields that are at least 30 acres of contiguous habitat, and also to incorporate the vegetation so we don't have a lot of standing stubble or weeds out there. And there's 2 different times that this can be implemented. In spring, and there'll be a duration there of approximately 4 to 6 weeks, or in fall when it's a shorter duration. And the reason for the difference in duration is that if in fall we provide habitat for a longer period of time, we often get a lot of weed growth and the habitat value decreases. So it just makes sense to only put the water out there for a shorter time period. Why do we have these specific requirements? Well, shorebirds wade around in the mud to forage. And so they're not swimming on the surface like a lot of waterfowl do and other birds. And some of the birds are really quite small. And so they walk around and they probe with their bills, and they just have to have shallow water and able to access the invertebrates that they feed upon, which are for the most part in the mud. So in addition to having the right depth, we also want to have the right surface conditions. And what that means for the shorebirds is to have minimal standing stubble or vegetation, which can be achieved by incorporating it into the soil. And having some exposed dirt is certainly a good thing as well. And the conditions such as these are typically achieved through mechanical treatments such as disking, chiseling, or stomping. And here's just a few examples. These are really good field conditions. So we see ponded habitat out there, shallow depth, some exposed mud. Here are poor field conditions. This is a depth stake that tells us this field is at 10 inches of depth, and there's a lot of standing rice stubble. Here's another example of really good field conditions. It doesn't have to be a perfectly smooth mud flat condition. Here we have these clumps, but that offers some heterogeneity in the soil and in the depth so that different species of birds can find the specific habitat requirements that they're looking for. And here's another one that doesn't have ideal field conditions because there's just so much stubble out there that it's difficult for the birds to get in and move around and access the mud substrates. And another example of really good field conditions. Here we can see that the straw residue is largely decomposed, and the birds just love field conditions like this where they basically have access to the whole area and it's all really wet. In addition, we have a second practice, which is the nesting cover practice for the program. And why do we have this? Well, it's to try to help us with this problem that we're facing currently of declining waterfowl populations among Central Valley breeders. So mallards are an example of this, and we see a mallard and some nesting cover on this picture. A main reason for the decline is that there is a lack of high quality nesting habitat. And so we can improve this by having nesting cover. So having vegetation that's on these fields where they can conceal their nests. And this is effective because it allows the hens to conceal the nests, and there's reduced predation, not just when they're in the nesting stage, but also importantly when the ducklings are making their migration to the flooded areas, to the seasonal wetlands where they which they utilize for brood rearing. So both nestling survival and brood survival are really increased if you have good nesting cover, and particularly if this nesting cover is in close proximity to flooded areas. And so what we are looking for are to leave non-irrigated small grain crops and other cover crops in the field until at least July 1st. And here are just a few examples. A lot of the small grain crops work well for this and have other soil benefits as well. So oats, rye, barley, wheat, etc., and the legumes and also brassicas. And in summary, then, we're looking for the opportunity to have habitat out on a subset of these fields that can help with the challenges that the birds are facing. But even so, within a given applicant's bid, there needs to be water conservation practices such that overall there's a significant water savings compared to the business as usual approach. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I think I'm back here to describe the other optional bonus condition, and this is only true for 6 fields throughout the Delta where we're going to carry out this enhanced field level analysis of water use in order to better calibrate OpenET, find any discrepancies, etc. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Kosana Suvakara of UC Davis, who is the principal investigator on this process Thank you, Kasana, for lighting up. And if I say anything wrong, you jump in and correct me. But the purpose here is to improve our ability over time to calculate the total water budget of these enrolled fields and to gather additional information about how enrollment in the program impacts water conservation on the site. So at 6 sites throughout the Delta, Dr. Suvakarov and her team from UC Davis will deploy eddy covariance equipment into specific fields that are enrolled in the program, so that at 6 of the fields spread throughout the Delta that are properly selected, we'll be able to have this enhanced analytical capability. In terms of what makes a good host site, there are a number of things. Number one, you need a significant contiguous area that has similar cropping patterns, minimum 20 acres with uniform site characteristics, same elevation, not a problem so much in the Delta, same kind of field management, soil type, etc. We're trying to find areas where we can put this equipment in the field for 3 years, not just for the current water year, but for an additional 3 years. And by the way, by hosting this equipment, there's a real benefit to the host farmer, because you've got access to all this really rich data about your soil, your practices. And I will say, based on my experience and experience of other farmers in the Delta, the access to the UC Davis personnel has turned out to be a tremendous advantage for the farmers to get better insight into their practices, to support their knowledge and understanding of the field with some of this scientific data collection and management, so that access to people and data can be a real advantage for farmers who want to learn more about their fields. We want to avoid fields with a lot of slope, not much of a problem in the Delta. We want to avoid areas that have a lot of drainage and other infrastructure. We want natural substrate. And insofar as the area that we're looking at has limited points of diversion and delivery mechanisms for the water, that helps simplify the process of figuring out the overall water balance. In addition, there are some other factors: not too close to the levees, not too close to trees so that you've got enough wind fetch and so forth. But in any case, throughout the Delta, we only need 6 of these. We are interested in knowing whether you would be willing to host this. Then we can send a team to figure out whether your site has the requisite characteristics. And obviously, this helps overall in the program to sharpen our focus, to sharpen our tools, and to be able to continue this comparative analysis between in-field measurement and the satellite measurement. Now, let me stop there and ask you, Kasana, if you want to add anything or correct anything.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. The only thing is that we would need also good winter access to the fields, because we want to collect the data all year round. And then if something needs to be replaced or repaired, we need the access in the winter as well.
And by the way, I should have said as well, that access, for the scientists, nobody will ever come on your property without giving you minimum 24 hours notice and working out the details. In addition, again, from experience, the people who are doing this under Dr. Sukarov's supervision are very knowledgeable about farming practices. They know about not leaving gates open. They are respectful of your equipment and needs in the area. They do know what they're doing, and they'll never just show up unannounced. So Martha, I think we're at that point to just send it back to you for Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a good amount of time for questions and answers. And so I'm going to have Hope confirm this, but did we want people to raise their hand and that you would unmute them at once or one at a time, Hope? How do we want to go about this?
Yes, I realize not everyone may have access to the chat, so if you have a question that you want to ask, there will be a little icon up in Teams to raise your hand. For some people, it might be under reactions and you would click the little hand, or it might just be a hand. So if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on people in order.
You see the hands? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Maurice has a question.
Yes.
Perfect. That worked.
Maurice, Hope is trying to find you to unmute you. You'll be up in just a second.
She has the international face of,
Can you hear
where's
me
that
now?
person?
Yes, we can hear you, Maurice.
What is your definition of contiguous? Are you referring to fields that share boundaries within a parcel, or are you referring to parcels that are that share boundaries?
So 100 acres minimum contiguity means that it's got to be a continuous field. We don't want the two areas of the project site, say, to be bifurcated by a levee road or something else. It can be, as long as it's contiguous, it doesn't matter if it's more than one assessor's parcel number. But what we want to do is make sure we're looking at 100 acres that are relatively uniform for the action that you're taking.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add that for the bird benefits, you could certainly have a couple of checks that combine to make that, or even a road that goes between two fields where you add the two checks that are adjacent to one another.
And also, a good point, Greg, even though for the program, your program has to be 100 contiguous acres, for the bird benefits program, you don't have to flood or do your practice on all of it. There, the minimum is 30 acres. So if within your bid, you can't flood the whole thing or something, you could still propose a bird benefit option on top of your program at a portion within that minimum 100 contiguous acres.
Dominic, did you have a question? I saw you raised your hand and it went away.
No, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, do we have other questions? I imagine we do, but maybe not. Gil Costa?
In regards to why is OpenET the chosen platform to run the models around irrigation management?
Hey, Gil. I can take this question if Michael, you can provide
Good.
any additional things I miss. Yeah, I saw your comment in the chat and thank you for being so engaged in this. So we're using OpenET because that will be a measurement of the evapotranspiration in that particular area. They've been collecting data since 2016. And they were collecting data, through when we were just thinking about this program. And so, it didn't require any instrumentation to be out in any of these project fields. So we had the data instantaneously available, or maybe not instantaneously, but again, within a soon amount of time, we had data for all the places we were interested in. And we're mostly focused on looking at the consumptive use, not necessarily checking the irrigation practices. So the farmers entered into grants where they would limit or completely eliminate, in most cases, irrigation on their lands. And then we're looking at the consumptive use savings. Even though a farmer may not actively irrigate their lands in the Delta because of the elevation, the hydrology, the fact that there's water everywhere. There's plenty of under seepage. There's, shallow groundwater. So that would cause plants, even though they weren't actively being irrigated by human, human managed diversions, they were still consuming water because this is the natural system that they work within. They don't care that a person told it that it was time to drink. They decided to consume water, um, or they're consuming water because it's there and available. So that's why we're using OpenET, because we're really just focused on this consumptive use portion to try to see if we as humans try to manage the irrigation differently, can we then achieve, what consumptive use savings can we achieve? What's realistic? What's reasonable?
Let me also add to that the policy implications here of using OpenET. The State Water Board has been deeply involved with the large academic team that has been developing OpenET for about the last 6 years. It's been funded very modest amounts by government, including seed contributions by the North, Central, and South Delta water agencies to try and develop this technology so that we would have a consistent way of estimating the crop ET within the Delta. But it's a much larger academic group that has developed it. The Water Board has been actively involved, not only in developing use cases to help inform the development of OpenET, but also to make sure that all the data from OpenET is open source, so that anybody who's got an interest can go in and see how the numbers are developed and so forth on a consistent basis over landscape scale areas, which is important not only in the Delta but elsewhere, and is in contrast to some of the ET estimation products that are out there that are kind of black box and don't have the open access to the data, can't be independently verified, and importantly, can't lend themselves to this cycle of continuous improvement through, for instance, the kind of ground truthing we talked about earlier. So those are also policy reasons. The State Water Board has gained a great deal of confidence in OpenET's accuracy, its openness, its ability to be replicated and improved over time. It's not perfect. It's never going to be. No measurement of ET is going to be perfect, but it's getting better all the time. It's comparable. It's a number that you can use to compare one field to another, 1 year to another, and see it in a data set over a period of time. As Lindsay says, OpenET has all of the data available down to the field level, 30 meters by 30 meters, back to 2016. In addition, because there is satellite data going back to 1985, you can use OpenET to get a snapshot over time that can be extremely valuable in terms of helping to inform farmers about what the impacts have been, and going forward what the impacts will be with climate change or aridification or reductions in use of water.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And one thing I'd like to see, so the ultimate reason is scalability.
Scalability and consistency.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and also wanted to add another comment that how we are doing the analysis and utilizing OpenET. We've gone back to OpenET, and they know that we're doing this program. They know how we are utilizing their data. We've also sought out experts from UC Davis and have explained to them, it's like, this is how we're using it. This is what we're planning on doing, and have also utilized experts within Department of Water Resources like Ricardo Teresa and other staff within State Water Board to explain to as many people as possible, hey, this is, how we've taken the data. This is how we've added it, subtracted it, divided things. Does this make sense? Is this a reasonable way to use it? And so, we're making sure to consult with experts as we go along with our analysis to make sure that what we're doing is scientifically sound and we're not, coming up with like, this is the number, as Michael mentioned. We're trying to come up with a range of values. So, if you take this action, this is a reasonable range of values to estimate would be your change in consumptive use. And also, yeah, sorry.
No, perfect. I just wanted to mention that I had done a little bit of research with Fresno State last year in determining, we did one initial crop, which was determining ET for onions with ground truth and soil moisture sensors. And I'd like to offer, also worked with Blake Sandin down in Bakersfield. I'd like to offer in any of these pilot locations a very accurate soil moisture probe to help generate some of these values.
That's
Yeah,
great,
definitely.
because soil moisture probes is one of the things that Dr. Sakharov is planning to deploy.
And we'd be doing this at no cost and just really trying to understand the science behind it because we're all on the same path.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd definitely be happy to talk with you offline about that. Again, just for this program though, for any of the analysis and things that we'll talk about, it will just be focused on the legal delta and activities happening here. But as you mentioned, there's so much other work happening within the state of California, and that's important. So I'd be happy to talk with you offline about that.
Be in touch.
Yeah, and also one other note I wanted to make sure was that even with, regardless of whatever the consumptive use savings calculations end up being, that does not impact the grant at all. We realize that farmers are diligently, following whatever they agreed to in the grant agreement, and we'll never go back and say, hey, this consumptive use savings wasn't what we expected. We want to change the grant agreements. That absolutely won't happen. It will, all the analysis is on us. And also this is just to gather more data. This isn't to, the farmers agreed to take this practice and they get paid for taking the practice, not paid for the consumptive use savings.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Great efforts.
Great, thanks for that interesting and good discussion. Do we have any other questions? Okay, Dominic. You folks are so orderly. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, I have this question. I've just had a chance to do the spreadsheet, but let's say you have two bids. One's at 100 acres and he bids $500 per acre, and it saves $5 acre feet per acre, just hypothetical. So the savings, the cost of water saved would be $100 of acre foot saved. Yeah, another bid was 100 acres and he bid $900 an acre, but he saved 10 acre feet per acre. So the cost would be $90 for an acre foot of water saved. So it'd be more advantageous to use the $900 bid. So which bid would be evaluated as a low bid, the $500 per acre that saves 5 acre feet, or the $900 per acre that saves 10 acre feet?
So I'm going to start that response, but then I'm going to kick it over to Lindsay. But it's a great question because it helps illustrate that you bid on dollars per acre, then we will do an analysis of your application based on information that we've developed through OpenET and through last year's program to compare those bids, those two bids, on a cost per acre foot of savings. So that'll happen on our side, and we'll recognize that the $900 bid actually increases the amount of savings. So we would recognize through that process that the estimated savings is so much higher with one that it's worth paying more for that. So that's how we will take responsibility for starting with your dollars per acre. And we heard universally from farmers that they wanted to bid dollars per acre because that's how they wanted to evaluate what incentive it would take for them to do the action on that field. So they don't have to worry about or think about or try to calculate. They're gonna propose what they propose to gain savings, but it will then be on us to equalize those two bids through the estimate of savings per acre. Now, Lindsay, if I said anything wrong, you're welcome to correct me.
Yeah, I mean, all that and, the cost per acre foot of water saved isn't the only factor going into this. As we mentioned, there's so many other additional factors, and we really want to get a better understanding of practices throughout the legal delta. So we'd also look at what particular action are they talking about taping? If they're talking about deficit irrigating wine grapes versus deficit irrigating corn, maybe the deficit irrigation of wine grapes is much more interesting or unique proposition than deficit irrigation of corn, and they would be selected um, even if they were the higher bidder. It's also possible that the location of one place is very unique, and therefore we may select that location or that bid because of that location. So I think
The,
there are a few different things.
I was just going to add, in the example you gave, Dominic, of a $500 bid and $900 bid for similar actions, but we determined that one has far better economic outcome. And let's say that $900 per acre bid was the market clearing bid. We needed to get that into the program to maximize our overall project opportunity. The $500 per acre bidder would get the $900 per acre market clearing price. So it illustrates, again, the advantage of bidding as aggressively as you can to get, the minimum number that would induce you to take the action that you're proposing. Because if in that process you can't get anything lower than your bid, so you want the bid to be, it's got to be a responsible bid. We want you to be happy if you are offered a grant at that price. But in that example, the $500 bidder would actually be offered a grant at the market clearing price of $900 per acre. So appreciate the question because it does help to illustrate some of the bidding process and to expose in this discussion the step that we'll take to equalize bids according to dollars per acre foot, while the farmer is only expected to bid dollars per acre for action.
Excellent answers. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for more questions.
We do, yes.
Being none?
So before we let this go, as you know, this is being recorded, so you can take a look at it and you can tell your friends or colleagues or partners. Also, to the extent that you would like to have more information or consultation and so forth, we're holding 2 in-person workshops like this. We'll be using the same agenda, but one is tomorrow at Gene Harvey in Walnut Grove at 10 o'clock, and then in the afternoon at the Roberts Union Farm Center at 2 o'clock. A lot of the same people will be making the presentation. But in addition to that, if you want to have a direct one-on-one conversation, reach out. We're happy to talk you through it, to get your ideas. And to the extent you bid early and we've got a question, we can come back to you. You can refine your bids up to, but not after 5 o'clock on October 18th. So I see we got one more question. That looks like Emily Hartman there.
Emily Hartman, really?
Oh, it says Hartman family. It's just my old eyes.
Well, my dad's name was Emil, so you're close. Mr. George. I do have a question about the bidding process. And I may have missed this because I got distracted for a few minutes. But when will the thresholds be announced?
As soon after the bid date as the selection committee can do all their analysis. So uncertain, we're shooting for 2 weeks. And also when we make selections, we still have to go through a process where the Delta Conservancy prepares the bids for approval by the board. That's a requirement of the grant making process. But the answer, George, is that we're shooting to do this as quickly as possible. That's why we're using electronic forms. Those forms will feed into some ranking software that we're developing, and we don't know how many we're going to get. We don't know how much we're going to have to reach out to get clarification, so forth. But we are highly motivated to get answers back as quickly as possible so that farmers can make decisions about whether they're in, whether they're out, what the market clearing price is, and then we can get through the grant execution process.
I've already had 2 calls from farmers during this program. And based on everything I've heard, since you've come up with a very clever way to have people walk themselves down a ladder. I'm guessing the best advice to them is bid the lowest amount you can live with.
Exactly. That's the best bidding strategy in a reverse auction like this, because it's unlike like a fine art auction. We've seen the Christie's auctions where you've got a single object and you're trying to find the highest price that somebody will pay for that. In a reverse auction, we've got a limited budget. We're trying to get as much done under that budget as possible. And so I think your analogy of kind of step by step walking down the ladder is going to help us all figure out best fit, not just lowest cost, but best fit to get as much benefit out of this program as we can under the available budget. And I want to do a shout out to the Department of Water Resources, because I think they recognized, as we were working through the 2022 program, that everybody in the state agencies learned a lot. Who knew that you guys would know more about your fields than me on the 25th floor of the Cal EPA building? But turns out you did, and you taught us a lot. And DWR said, these data really help us understand practices in the Delta, the ability to conserve water in the Delta, what practices work and don't work, how we can improve the resilience of the Delta, the ability to repel salts, and DWR took the lead in getting the governor's budget to include not only a replication of this program, but to upsize it and to allow us to be more flexible to get additional environmental as well as water conservation and soil repulsion options. So DWR has been, as Lindsay said, they've put some of their scientists into the work to review the data. It's been a good partnership, and importantly, they were willing to advocate before we had all the data, advocate in the budget to do it again, because we looked at obviously the fact that we were going to have low reservoir levels again. So, thank you.
So,
Yeah, and
Michael, I'm sorry, Lindsay. I appreciate what you said. I want to go on a slightly different track. And if I go too far afield, you can disconnect me. But I was listening to the wildlife expert, and I have a great fascination with waterfowl. Not because I hunt, it's because I love them. And right behind where our home is right Elmwood Tract, which they're now growing rice in. They flood. I think it is now flooded, judging by the Thule fog I saw this morning. And we'll have thousands of swans and snow geese and others in there shortly. And it's an incredible opera at night. So here's where this leads me. It's very clear that rice growing in California is critical for a lot of the wildlife reasons that were mentioned, but also for sustainability. And I don't think the state is doing a very good job of promoting rice growing. I certainly encourage farmer clients to do this. I don't think any of us realize, I've studied this somewhat extensively, how much California rice is imported by China and Japan. They don't eat their own rice because it's toxic in China. They only give it to the poor people. That's their way of doing things. But California rice is known throughout the world as being very low in arsenic compared to other places in the United States. So rice from Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas is high in arsenic because they used to spray it to kill boll weevils. But California rice is prized throughout the world. And okay, so how does this tie into what you're doing? I think rice growing should be preferential in your program.
So
somehow.
Yeah, believe me, a lot of what you say makes sense to us. And as you know, the Delta Conservancy has been one of the leaders in assisting with that conversion to rice. The Rice Commission has substantial grants available because what we found out really through the Delta Conservancy's efforts were that the hurdle was the upfront conversion cost. And so there are programs for that. Now, and it helps with subsidence and so forth. It doesn't fit so well within this program because, as we've all said, this program is aimed at figuring out actions and activities that can conserve water, because that's what we're looking at in this program. That's what this budget is aimed at. That doesn't mean that it's ignorant of what's going on in rice conversion, and the state is doing a lot and will continue to do more on that. And there are circumstances in which rice cultivation can be a water conservation effort. We didn't see any of those proposals made in 2022. We're totally open to it in 2023 under other, if you can figure out how it can fit within, the main parameter here is that we've got to find, when we do the analysis of your action, that over the course of the 2023 water year, we can project a net water savings. That's harder to do with rice.
I guess it depends on when you flood the rice, doesn't it?
That's one of the variables, and Greg knows more about this than I do, but it's a good example of, we want to work with farmers and potentially provide incentives to tweak what they're already doing, what they know how to do, what makes sense in their farming practices, with some incentive to tweak it so it also creates these other ancillary benefits.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if I could
Well,
add,
you and I can talk more. Huh?
Well,
Sorry,
I was
go ahead.
just going to say thank you for those reflections and observations, George. It's fantastic. I would say that rice, when not in production, can also provide amazing habitat when it's flooded for a short-term period at the right time and to the right depth. And so if someone was going to not plant rice, they could still have tremendous habitat value in those fields. And in turn, that may help make the rice more sustainable, because in a year when all the fields can't be planted, there may be some revenue derived from creating habitat. And really looking at the big picture of things, with more fallowing of rice taking place each year as droughts become more and more common, I think that kind of creative thinking is going to take us a long way at both helping maintain rice as a productive, profitable commodity, but also making up for the lost habitat and helping meet the habitat needs of the migratory water birds.
And I hear that and I love it. And what I'm thinking is that translates into incentivizing people to do it, and you do that with a premium financially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that plugs into this program, maybe not for this next year, but it's certainly worth thinking about. So I guess you could do it this year in the other category.
Yes, you could do it this year in the other category. And also, let me say, again, giving a shout out to Campbell Ingram. He's been one of the evangelists for this and has done as much as anybody I know to acquire funds to support rice production in the Delta. So, George, believe me, the Conservancy is on it, even if it doesn't, it may be, it's the same church, just different pew.
Okay, but I want to try and personally push what Greg was talking about, and that's so I could see under other, it would be fallowing a rice field with irrigation at an appropriate time for a short term to create the required habitat that Greg would like to see. Right, Greg?
That's right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
George, you've got a lot of really smart farmer clients. So again, we can talk about this offline, but we're wide open to that kind of creativity.
Well, I'd like to see this. I realize that the point of this is to, well, it's multifaceted, but the main thing is to save water and learn more about the Delta, because not enough people know enough about the Delta and how it really works and how the plumbing works and so forth and so on. So, but at the same time, if we don't work really hard at restoring our wildlife ecosystem, particularly migratory birds, we're not going to have any. So I'd like to combine social purposes into the water purpose. Let's see if I can convince some rice growers to make Greg happy.
Right on.
So good for you, George. I'm going to take advantage of the prerogative you gave me to give you the hook.
Okay.
We've this has been a good exploration. I am mindful that we've got a few minutes left for potential other questions, but I really want to encourage, and I'm happy to make the connection between you and Greg and his colleagues at TNC to talk through and figure out a way to do that. So thanks very much.
Okay. Would you give Greg my cell number, please?
I will.
Okay. Thank you.
That's also a good segue. When we're done with the conversation, the question and answer, I'm going to put up the contact slide that has Greg's information on it and everybody else's information as well. So, as Michael said, I would encourage folks, if you're interested in the in-person meeting tomorrow, you'll hear some of the same things, but more time for conversation as well. But are there any other questions? We do have time.
Yeah, and Martha, could I make a suggestion that, yeah, we keep it open for questions during the recording, but that we offer to take it, end the recording and then still be available for any questions until noon in case people maybe want to go into their specifics about their application, but not have it recorded for everyone to hear later.
Yeah, interesting.
Now, let me say, good point, Lindsay. Although because this is happening in the overall context of grant making and there are requirements and statute and so forth, every question that we get, we're creating a frequently asked questions document. So every question that we get, we'll try and give you a coherent answer. We'll put it in writing and it'll be published on the website so that everybody will have the advantage of understanding all the responses given to all participants. But I agree, if after we finish recording, people want to just chat, I think that's good. And again, as Martha and I have both said, reach out to any of us at the contact information you'll get here at the end. And we're happy to have discussions one-on-one. We certainly found last year that when we got into those one-on-one conversations, and we visited every single field, some of them multiple times, those one-on-one conversations are invaluable. I always say I can learn a lot more riding shotgun in a farmer's F-150 than I can sitting here on a Zoom call.
Okay, do we have other questions? Great discussion. I drove by some flooded rice fields on the way in that were flooded for waterfowl, so. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Let me do what I said I was going to do and put up our contact information. Could see myself forgetting that. Self-servedly, I put myself first, but we also have Michael here and Greg and some Julia also from the Nature Conservancy. So phone numbers and emails and maybe do a screenshot of this. I was going to say, I think we could send this out to everybody, but I know I don't want to speak for Hope. This is kind of a new technology for us doing this webinar, so I don't want to make it more complicated.
Let me
Well,
take a
and
screenshot and add it to the chat.
And in any case, you can also just leave that up as we keep it open for a few more questions, if there are any.
Yep, and write stuff down. My information is on our website, so but Michael's and Greg and Julia's isn't, so. Okay. I am no longer seeing folks because I'm sharing my screen. So if anybody else is raising their hand, if either Hope or Michael could unmute them and let them talk, or Hope unmute them.
Everything we talk about is being turned into a fact.
Questions are.
Yeah, questions, George, we'll put into a frequently asked questions. And to the extent that it wasn't directly a question, we'll use the discussion to inform that frequently asked questions document. And it'll be a living document because we'll get additional questions tomorrow at the 2 sessions and potentially thereafter. So we'll keep updating it. Hope to put the first version of it up on the Conservancy website as early as Monday, assuming that we can pull together coherent answers to the questions we get today and tomorrow.
I think that'll be very helpful.
Good.
So hearing nothing more, I'm just going to say bid low and often.
Like voting, right?
Okay, well, thanks. Oh, did someone?
People are waiting in the lobby.
Hi, Nancy. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Seems like we've exhausted the audience. We knew that 2 hours was probably a long time, but wanted to make ourselves available as long as people wanted to have further discussion. And I'm certainly happy to have George Hartman with the last word. Bid low and early and often.
But only up to 1,000 acres.
No, you can bid as many acres as you want. We just won't approve grants
yeah.
for more than 1,000 acres. So go ahead, give us all the creative ideas you've got and as many project sites as you can put together. It'll give us more to look at. And yeah, just as a matter of fairness, we set the 1,000-acre maximum for grants, not for bids.
So if we're just shooting the bull, let me tell you, one of the things we do on McDonald Island and have done for years is create habitat.
Well, first, George, just want to point out that we're still doing the recording now. So
that's fine. This is
okay.
public information. Thank you,
Okay.
Lindsay. We just finished a habitat site working with Fish and Wildlife, and so it's a favored activity on McDonald Island. I know Michael has seen some of that habitat. We're trying to arrange for you to see it, Lindsay and Lisa. We're working on that. I don't know if Michael shared that with you, but we'd like you to come see it. And so I think doing what Greg said fits really well within our scheme of habitat creation. But Greg, can you tell me what the time frame would be for the temporary flooding?
Certainly. So let's see, I'm going to remind myself so I get it perfectly correct here. But within the spring, it's basically January through the end of May. And so any time within that period, and we're looking for a 4 to 6 week time span with an average depth of 4 inches. And then in fall, what we identified in the solicitation was the month of September to have a 3 to 4 week flooding. With fall, it's tricky because there may not be water available for this, and we have to have certain criteria met before we're able to actually go ahead with an agreement focused on that time period. And ideally, we would have habitat even before that, but that's a more remote possibility of being acceptable. So September is the time period that's the focus of the program.
Actually, that's not so extreme because in the spring period that the rice is flooded. Period. And that's what they start flooding shortly after harvest, which is occurring now or about now, or has occurred. And then rice isn't usually harvested until sometime in October.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Greg's point, though, George, is that the ability of a grantee to flood up in September is obviously going to be dependent on curtailments and drought policy. I think it is realistic to think about flooding in September in the context of what we all hoped will be a very wet year. But for instance, in the prior 3 years, given where we were in September, it would not have been allowable to do flood up.
Even in the tidal delta?
Well, and then it gets into, the nature of the water right and operation management and everything. So as a general rule, though, we should think about September flood up in this program as being a very positive option dependent on where we are in terms of overall water policy and drought.
Okay.
For instance, even if you could, let's say, legally divert in September under a riparian right that was not curtailed, if we had curtailments throughout the watershed, we wouldn't want this program to increase water use in September and therefore reduce the buffer against salinity intrusion. So it's a combination of how wet the water year is or how dry it is, where we are in terms of overall watershed water use, and where we are in terms of risk of salinity intrusion, because salinity intrusion is highest in mid-August through mid-September in very dry years like we've had the last 3.
Okay, well, we can talk about it more offline.
Good.
Thanks for such an interesting discussion. I will point out that in the solicitation documents, the infographic that Greg shared, where different practices and different flood ups and the time, is I think the last page of that document. So that could be helpful to look at as well.
That's a good point, Martha. Indeed, I would encourage anybody who's going to bid into this program to read the entire solicitation document. It's not long. It's, I don't know, 7 or 8 pages, but it gives you a lot more detail and gives you more insight into overall program objectives, which, as we've said, the selection committee will be taking into account to achieve best fit. So by reading that solicitation document, you'll have an enhanced sense for all the potential benefits, not just the water conservation benefit.
Okay, something I haven't heard, and it may be because I missed it, is that in terms of criteria for bid selection, I don't see any harm in having a stated preference for multi-benefit proposals.
Oh, we clearly do. And it is in the solicitation document very clearly. And when I talked about what's different this year, one of the main things is that we're trying to expand the scope for environmental as well as farming practices, and also providing more protection for any water that is conserved. Last year, we were very clear that it wouldn't result in increased exports. In other words, we weren't asking for conservation to allow for more water to be exported from the Delta, but we did, as things developed, and there were curtailments in the Delta, we did get the argument that we should have included the conservation under this program as water available for others to divert. In other words, to defer or reduce their curtailments. This year, we're being very clear that this water conservation is being dedicated to in-stream beneficial use. It is neither available for increased exports nor available so that if you conserve, your next door neighbor can take more water. It'll be used to create that incremental buffer against water quality intrusion.
Okay, but there's a third category of growing rice it's not just environmental benefit, it's not just if done right, a water savings benefit. There's also a distinct human benefit in terms of providing the United States and the world with a superior, healthier product. So there are a lot of different benefits. I'm not a rice lawyer, I'm a water lawyer.
Never heard of a rice lawyer.
I bet they have them.
I bet they do. You're right.
They probably work for the rice growers.
Probably true. Okay, I think we're
Lindsay,
down.
I think you should become a rice lawyer.
I'm definitely going
Okay.
home and checking the area of origin for my rice when I get home. I had not heard that
You
much
should.
about arsenic, so now I'm kind of scared.
Arsenic is a big problem, and if you want to know more, call me. I've been researching it.
Yeah, I'm a little worried. Maybe like ignorance is bliss in this case, but
No, it's not. It's grown in Texas, Alabama, or Arkansas or Louisiana. You don't want to eat it.
all right.
I know the rice that's grown in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area does go to Japan, so which I've found
Yeah.
fascinating. So,
China imports tons of rice from California. The Calrose rice variety is the mainstay in Japan because of the low arsenic.
interesting.
Anybody who wants to know more, just call me, 209-351-2222.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. Appreciate that.
Well, it's fun. It's fun to research when I've got time.
Hey, do we have any more questions? Looks like I feel like the rest of the people who are on might be all agency folks, but I'm not positive. I'm glad we had a good discussion.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for your time and attention. We appreciate it. And as Martha has said, and others of us have repeated, we're here to give you any help we can in crafting and submitting your bids by 5 p.m. on October 18th.
Okay, well, thanks so much, guys. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
well, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.